Preoccupied, a channel where I explain books, philosophy, art, fairy tales, and myths. I hope you're ready to be thoroughly preoccupied by the myth of Cupid and Psyche. This myth first appeared in Metamorphoses Apuleius, otherwise known as the Golden Ass. The myth is sort of an aside in the bigger story. Apuleius gets turned into a donkey, and while he's in this state, he overhears a drunk old woman telling a young girl about Cupid and Psyche. The form of this story is less like a myth and more like a fairy tale. I will do a breakdown of the distinction between myths and fairy tales in a later video, but for now you'll just have to take my word for it. Luckily for you, I just completed a class going through the myth of Cupid and Psyche in the original Latin, so I am well prepared to talk about it. I'm going to give a narrative retelling of the story and then compare it to some other fairy tales and one famous retelling in particular. Let's jump right in. Once upon a time, there was a kingdom far, far away. The king and queen had 3 daughters. The 2 oldest were very beautiful, but the youngest was the most beautiful girl in the land. Her name was Psyche. She was so beautiful that everyone said she must be a goddess. In fact, they stupidly started calling her Venus and began sacrificing to her in place of Venus. So Venus's temples were all empty, her altars were all empty, she wasn't getting any sacrifices. Venus was not happy about this, to put it mildly. She called upon her son Cupid and told him to get rid of this insolent mortal girl. Cupid was a mama's boy and also afraid of her because she brought him into the world and she could take him out of it. Literally. Flashback from the world of the gods to the world of the mortals. The kingdom was not doing very well. Naturally, the king and the queen were concerned, so they went to the Oracle of Delphi, who was sort of the ancient Google search, except she was the prophetess of Apollo, so her oracles were often very vague and very ominous. Unfortunately for Psyche, this oracle was not vague at all. There was a dragon up on top of the mountain, according to the oracle, and it wanted to marry her? Eat her? Okay, maybe that part was a little unclear, but basically she had to go to the top of the mountain and be sacrificed to this dragon. So with much weeping, her parents tied her to a tree and left her there, on the top of the mountain, alone. After everyone had left, Zephyrus, the west wind, picked her up, carried her over a chasm, and dropped her in a valley. In this valley was a very beautiful palace, so Psyche did the only thing that she really could do and went into the palace. Psyche was attended by some invisible servants, which was a little creepy, as you can imagine. They fed her, got her ready for bed, and carried her up to a dark room. While she was in this dark room, her husband came to her, and they did what a husband and a wife do on their wedding night. Anyways, it was so dark she couldn't see his face. Eventually, Psyche got used to the beautiful house and the invisible servants, and she even fell in love with her husband? Dragon? Yes, maybe she only got to see him at night, and maybe he didn't let her see his face, and maybe the one rule was that she was never allowed to see him in daylight, ever, under any circumstances. But that wasn't that suspicious, right? Right. But eventually, Psyche did start to miss her sisters. Not her parents so much, which kind of adds up because, they left her alone on top of the mountain. So she started begging and begging her husband to let them come to visit her. At first, he was hesitant. He told her that no good could come of it, but she was so persistent that eventually he just said yes. Luckily, or unluckily, her sisters were planning to come up to the mountain at that very moment. They wanted to visit her grave and mourn her death, so up the mountain they went. How surprised they were when they found their most beautiful sister not only alive, but very, very happy. She brought them across the chasm with the help of Zephyrus and showed them her ginormous palace with all of her invisible servants, and she told them about her amazing husband. She told them that he was young and blonde and currently not at home. They did not believe her. On the journey back home, they decided that they had had enough of Psyche. They both had old husbands, and they were both pretty sure that Psyche's husband was a god. Psyche had it better than them. Again. And they were done. They hatched a plan to knock her off her pedestal for good. The sisters returned for a second visit. Zephyrus again carried them over the chasm. They pretended like all was well, then casually brought her husband back into the conversation. What did he look like again? Psyche, being a typical dumb blonde, blithely told them that her husband was middle-aged and dark-haired and currently on a business trip. The sisters smirked inwardly and reminded her ever so gently that she had previously told them her husband was young and blonde. Psyche, caught, broke down and admitted that she had never seen her husband's face, and that she thought she might be pregnant. Plot twist. Her sisters told her that obviously her husband was an evil dragon who wanted to eat her and her weird dragon baby. The only thing to do, they claimed, was to bring a lamp and a knife to bed with her and use them to first see her husband's face and then kill him. Psyche, again a dumb blonde, saw no problem with this. She thought it was the perfect plan. She hid the lamp and the knife, and after her husband came to her, she went to their hiding place. She grabbed the knife, lit the lamp, and held it up to her husband's face, but he was not, in fact, a dragon. He was beautiful, because he was a god. Specifically, he was Cupid. The knife clattered to the ground. She walked closer. She held the lamp up, so that she could see him, and a drop of oil spilled over and fell onto his shoulder. Cupid woke up a bit miffed. Psyche had broken the one rule, and now he had to leave or risk his mom's wrath. So he flew away, leaving Psyche alone, sad, and very afraid, and also pregnant. But she picked herself up and set off to do the first thing that any logical, sane person would do in her situation: get revenge on her sisters. She went to her oldest sister and basically said that she had done the thing, and turned out her husband was Cupid. But Cupid didn't really want poor little Psyche. Oh no. Cupid wanted Psyche's older sister and was just waiting across the chasm for her. Naturally, her sister was completely taken in. She went to the chasm and, expecting Zephyrus to carry her across, jumped, only to fall to her very crunchy death. How sad. Psyche pulled the same trick on her other sister, and boom, revenge got. But now Venus knew she was alive and was on the hunt. Psyche had nowhere to go and no one to turn to. She was all alone and pregnant, so she visited the goddess Ceres. This put Ceres in a hard place. On the one hand, Psyche was Cupid's wife, and even though Cupid was off sulking like a teenage boy, presumably he would be angry if Ceres hurt his wife. On the other hand, Venus sucked, and she would be angry if Ceres did not hurt Psyche. She decided that the only thing for Psyche to do was turn herself in and hope for the best. So Psyche did. Venus, being a massive jerk, cackled evilly and immediately started calling Psyche names, and also claimed that her child was illegitimate. She used much more colorful language, which I will not repeat here. Use your imagination. Then, like any good mother-in-law, Venus began setting Psyche impossible tasks. First, Venus brought her to a giant storehouse full of barley, wheat, lentils, and beans, and commanded her to separate them into piles by morning. She left Psyche stupefied in front of an enormous mountain of grains. Psyche just stared and stared, until finally a group of ants, feeling sorry for her and knowing that she was Cupid's wife, decided to take pity on her and help her complete the task. The next morning, Venus was surprised, and not a little displeased, to find the piles sorted, so she assigned another task: to gather golden fleece from a herd of sheep. Unfortunately, these happened to be man-eating sheep, which Venus conveniently forgot to tell Psyche. Luckily, there was a river right next to the pasture, so as Psyche approached the fence, the river god told the reeds to warn her about the man-eating sheep, because he knew that she was Cupid's wife. So, the reeds warned her to wait till the herd took a nap at noon and then gather the wool from the bushes. Psyche gratefully took their advice and returned unharmed with an armful of golden wool. Venus was yet again angry that Psyche had completed her task, so she set her on a third and worse one. Take a box to Proserpine, the queen of the underworld, and ask for some of her beauty, and return with it by evening. Psyche decided that the fastest way to get to the underworld was to throw herself off the top of a tower, which was not wrong. But the tower, again, knowing she was Cupid's wife, told her that this plan was stupid. The tower instead informed her of the safest way over the river, past the giant guard dog, and before the throne of Proserpine. He warned her not to open the box of beauty under any circumstances. After Psyche had done as the tower advised and was on her way back to Venus, she thought how interesting it would be to see the beauty of a goddess. Once again, a dumb blonde. She opened the box and found not Proserpine's beauty, but actually a Stygian sleep. She fell down, so asleep that she was basically dead. It was at this point that Cupid came back. As it turns out, he had been nursing his wounds in his mom's house, unaware of Psyche's presence there. He was locked in his room for disobeying his mother, but unable to bear his absence from his wife, and knowing that she was in trouble, he escaped and rushed to her side. He gathered the sleep out of her and put it back in the box. He told Psyche to go back to Venus and complete the task, and then he flew up to Jupiter to sort everything out. Jupiter took pity on the lovers and convinced his favorite daughter to give them her blessing. Jupiter gave Psyche a special drink that would make her immortal and keep Cupid faithful forever. So Cupid and Psyche were reunited, and they had a daughter and named her Voluptas. And they all lived happily ever after. This story is the basis for many fairy tales. The first half is the basis for Beauty and the Beast. The second half is pretty much every evil stepmother story, also low-key Rumpelstiltskin vibes. There's a great Norwegian fairy tale called East of the Sun, West of the Moon, which is almost exactly the same as Cupid and Psyche. But probably the most famous retelling of Cupid and Psyche is C.S. Lewis's Till We Have Faces. The story of Cupid and Psyche captivated Lewis even before he was a Christian. And when reading a book like Till We Have Faces, it's important to be at least a little familiar with the original story because often the author will switch it up to make a point. Lewis does this a few times in the book. Here are a few examples. Warning, there's some spoilers, so just skip this section of the video if you need. First, he tells the story from the perspective of Psyche's older sister, Orwell. Second, Orwell is not able to see the palace when she visits Psyche. Third, Orwell does not die after visiting Psyche. Fourth, Orwell helps Psyche complete the tasks. And there are many, many more if you just take the time to look for them. All of these changes are important points in the story and mark a very important moment in Orwell's growth as a character. This is why knowing the old stories is important. When we know the old stories, we can see the tropes and the reversal of tropes and understand the greater point the author is making. Myths and fairy tales like Cupid and Psyche allow us to converse with the greats of literature, like Homer or Virgil or Shakespeare or even Lewis. We learn the old stories first because they're great stories. Who doesn't love a good retelling of a myth? But also because they're the gateway to understanding every good book that was written after them. Have a lovely day, and God bless the rest of your week. Bye!
In the gloaming on the bonny banks of Clyde, roaming in the gloaming way, my lassie by my side. When the sun has gone to rest, that's the time that we love best. Oh, it's lovely roaming in the gloaming.